Now for our weekly insider, it was an assassination attempt right out of a spy novel. But there's nothing fictitious about the attempted poisoning of a Russian spy in Britain. UK police believe Sergei Skripal and his daughter were attacked with a nerve agent. There have been no arrests, but the Kremlin is suspected of ordering the attacks. President Vladimir Putin appeared on Russian TV suggesting the Kremlin was involved.
Те, кто капают куда-то яд, сами его и проглотят в конце концов. Сами этим ядом и отравятся.
Yeah, pretty brazen. MPs are now calling for an inquiry into whether Putin's hit squads have killed as many as 14 people on UK soil. Prime Minister Theresa May is also exploring sweeping sanctions against Kremlin insiders. Putin's iron grip on Russia has lasted almost 2 decades. If he wins another term in next week's election, and let's face it, he will, Putin will be Russia's longest-serving leader since Joseph Stalin. So how does he do it? Well, he uses the same tactics which kept Stalin in power. Let's start with the first: tightly control the wealth. Putin relies on an oligarchy of extremely rich businessmen to keep him in power. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. They pay him billions, and he protects them and their billions. His closest 50 oligarchs have a calculated worth of, yes, $213 billion combined. That's almost as much as Russia's entire federal budget. It's sickening. Putin's second tactic: silence the opposition. Putin has slowly eroded protest and voting rights. He's arrested his political opponents and propped up puppet candidates. And here's the third part of his strategy: threaten the rest of the world. So yes, Russia consistently destabilizes the world, whether it's annexing Crimea, supporting Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, or meddling in the U.S. elections. Russian democracy advocate Vladimir Kara-Murza, he knows all about this. He knows about Putin's dictator style. It's suspected that he, Kara-Murza, was poisoned by the Kremlin twice and survived. And Vladimir Kara-Murza joins us. A big part of the protest against Putin lately has been focused on corruption. We saw recently he announced that his salary is $112,000 a year and that he drives a Lada and has a few savings. And yet I've read that he could be perhaps the richest man in the world. How corrupt is he? How rich is he?
Well, by many estimates, Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world. Of course, all this...
Billions.
Tens and hundreds of billions, but of course this is a shadow empire, so this is not to be seen or to be accounted for. We very seldomly we see small bits of it, small tips of very small icebergs. For example, 2 years ago when the Panama Papers came out, it emerged that one of his closest friends, the cellist by the name of Sergei Skripal, held some $2 billion worth of assets in that particular one Panama offshore. And you know, what was said, I remember back in Moscow at the time, that we always thought that Sir Paul McCartney was the richest musician in the world. Apparently it's this guy Sergei Skripal nobody ever heard of, because he of course serves as one of the wallets for Vladimir Putin. This is how he apparently does it. So he stashes this money through close friends, through his close circle. And of course it's not by accident that it is called a kleptocracy. The raison d'etre of this regime and of these people is to amass these personal riches for themselves through corruption, through effectively stealing from the Russian people, and then to preserve political power by rigging elections, by engaging in television propaganda, and so on and so forth, because they need that political power to protect the ill-gotten gains that they have amassed.
So there have recently been efforts to try and seize the assets or limit the corruption of these oligarchs, the inner circle of Putin, through sanctions, the Magnitsky Act and other sanctions here and to an extent in the States. Is that the way to stop Putin or control Putin? What sort of effect is that having?
First of all, it's the right thing to do, because there is this fundamental double standard and fundamental hypocrisy that lies right at the heart of the Putin regime, and that is that those same people, the officials and the oligarchs around Putin, who are abusing, violating and undermining the basic norms of democratic society in Russia, in our country, they themselves want to use the privileges and opportunities of democratic society in the West. They send their children to study in Western schools. They buy high-class real estate and yachts and luxury cars in Western countries. They keep their money in Western banks, their money, the money they've stolen from the Russian people through corruption. And for too long, for many years, many Western countries have been accepting this, accepting these people and their dirty money on their territories and in banks, and in effect enabling corrupt and abusive behavior. And we think that this hypocrisy and this double standard should stop. And so a little more than 5 years ago now, the United States of America became the first country to pass a Magnitsky Act, which laid down a very simple principle that those people, those individuals in the Russian government who are responsible for human rights abuses and corruption will no longer be able to receive visas and use the financial and banking system, in this case of the United States. Since then, 4 other countries have passed their own Magnitsky laws, and of course, your own country, Canada, last October, passed its own Magnitsky Act. I'm proud to say that some of us in the Russian opposition have played a small part in helping that process along. So we believe that sanctions should be personal. It doesn't make any sense to target or to punish an entire country for the actions of a small clique of kleptocrats sitting in and around the Kremlin. The responsibility should be assigned where it is due with these specific individuals.
Putin, it seems, has control of the elections. He has killed opponents, imprisoned them, taken away their money, their livelihood. He's tried to poison you, or someone close to him tried to poison you twice. Can he be stopped?
Well, there was a very important lesson in modern Russian history that I think Mr. Putin would do actually well to remember. This is something that happened in my living memory. In August of 1991, the leaders of the then Soviet Union, the top leadership of the Communist Party and the KGB, decided to put a stop to all these experiments with glasnost and perestroika and democracy and go back to the good old ways as they saw them, or the bad old ways. And so one early morning in August of 1991, we saw tanks on the streets of our city, on the streets of Moscow. Russian citizens, Muscovites, who refused to accept it and who decided to defend their dignity and their freedom. They were not armed with anything. They were just armed with their determination to defend their rights and to defend their status as citizens of their own country. And the tanks stopped and turned away. When there are enough people who are willing to stand up against tyranny, against dictatorship, against oppression, all this apparently powerful, dictatorial force becomes meaningless and powerless. And we see more and more people in Russia today, especially young people, and this is very important because it represents a turning point. More and more young people who are willing, despite the risks and the dangers and the intimidation and the propaganda, to go out into the streets to openly express their opposition and their rejection of this regime. And I think this is a very worrying sign for the Kremlin, but I think it's a very hopeful and very promising sign for the future of our country.
How hard is it to be an activist? You've been poisoned twice.
Well, yeah, I think you just answered that question, but what choice do we have? This is our country. The only option we have is to carry on with our work. And we know that there are many people... You have 3 kids? I do have 3 children, and they are actually outside of Russia for obvious reasons, and a lot of people have to do that, who are active in the opposition movement. But, I think there's no better gift we could give to the Putin regime than to just give up what we're doing and run. This is, again, Russia is our country. We believe in it. We have to fight for it, and we'll do all we can to make sure that our country has a government that is based on rule of law, democracy, and respect for the rights of its own citizens.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Good to be on your program.